The U.S. is building up its military forces across West Asia, with the U.S. military deploying the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group into the region, accompanied by additional air, naval, and missile defense forces. Trump and the U.S. media are scaremongering about fake Iranian WMDs. It's starting to feel a lot like 2003 and the Iraq War fever again. Last month, Trump threatened war with Iran over protests, and outlets like CBS pushed out bogus claims of tens of thousands killed to help justify calls for regime change, figures that we trace back to the CIA cutout of the National Endowment for Democracy. And while the entire theater to justify the destruction of Iran looks all too familiar, not a single media outlet has reported on the tiny rogue nation of Israel that actually possesses hundreds of nuclear weapons, with many of them pointing at Iran. So while Iran has been proven time and time again not to possess any nuclear weapons, Israel has them. The hypocrisy is striking, and the agenda is very, very clear. To help us understand the situation, we are joined by Scott Ritter. Scott is a former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer and United Nations weapons inspector who oversaw the dismantling of Iraq's WMDs. He has since become a whistleblower. Thank you for joining us, Scott.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
So I want to play a clip by Donald Trump that was released this morning, and I want to get your reaction since it really sets the stage to what we're talking about today.
Some terrible people. They've already developed missiles that can threaten Europe and our bases overseas, and they're working to build missiles that will soon reach the United States of America. After Midnight Hammer, they were warned to make no future attempts to rebuild their weapons program, and in particular, nuclear weapons. Yet they continue, starting it all over. We wiped it out, and they want to start all over again, and are at this moment again pursuing their sinister ambitions. We are in negotiations with them. They want to make a deal, but we haven't heard those secret words. We will never have a nuclear weapon. My preference is to solve this problem through diplomacy. But one thing is certain, I will never allow the world's #1 sponsor of terror, which they are by far, to have a nuclear weapon. Can't let that happen.
Well, first of all, I would remind the American president that the United States has surrounded Iran with military capability that can strike Iranian territory. And it's just a little bit hypocritical to undertake these actions and then express umbrage at Iran daring to create the capability to strike the United States. First of all, we don't know if that's true. That seems to be an assessment made by people of programs they don't understand. And I don't think it's reflective of Iran's true strategic posture at this time. And, having the president say that he will not allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon is, I have to be careful with the analogies I use, but, like telling a dog that, we're going to insist that he barks. Iran doesn't want a nuclear weapon at all. They've said this over and over again. So the president's, statement that he will not allow Iran to have that which they say they don't want to have is a meaningless statement. It creates the perception that somehow Iran is trying to pursue a nuclear weapons program, and that only through the will and tenacity of the American president is Iran being constrained in this regard. You mentioned people rising to their feet and in cheering the president. The ignorance that is manifest in the United States Congress about Iran, about the reality of Iran, is shocking. They cheer that which they do not understand, and also the lack of humanity. I mean, even if there was a case for war, and clearly there is not, a war unleashed on the region will result in the deaths of untold thousands of innocent people, truly innocent people. And for anybody to be standing up and applauding the possibility of a conflict that achieves these results, it just shows that there is no moral compass in the United States today. There's no intellectual compass. We don't know anything about Iran, but there's furthermore no moral compass, because unlike the people that are in Congress standing up and cheering, I have been to Iran. I have met the Iranian people. And while I may have reason to disagree with the Iranian government on any number of issues, I'm not saying I do, I'm just saying that's a possibility. It's okay. I disagree with my own government on any number of issues. I would never wish the Iranian people harm. They are wonderful, cultured people who greeted me with open arms. They were friendly, they were warm, they were very human, very kind, very loving. And the last thing any human being should ever want is to have harm inflicted on people, but especially people like this. These are peaceful people. They're not looking for trouble. They're just looking to live their life, free of the tyranny of war.
None of that, of course, matters to the US government and our politicians and Western corporate media that are obviously fear-mongering, and they've spent, decades dehumanizing the people of Iran to justify the point that we are today, where the US is calling for regime change and now an all-out war. But this really has come down to Iran's nuclear energy program and the negotiations behind that. Can you give us an update on what this Iranian nuclear negotiations have looked like and what Iran has given back to the US? Because it sounds like the United States is kind of not even listening to what Iran is saying in terms of negotiations and denying all of their, what they're putting on the table.
Well, I don't know the specifics of the, especially the most recent. Now, what I do know is this: in June of 2025, Iran was engaged in a similar kind of negotiation with the United States, ostensibly to prevent military conflict. And the position that Iran was preparing to provide to the United States was one which resolved the issue in a very profound manner, allowed Iran to retain a small enrichment capability so that Iran could say that they hadn't given it up, but it would have turned over to dismantlement and monitoring the vast majority of this indigenous enrichment program that they had built up. This was what Iran was willing to do to avoid a war. Now, Israel bombed them in a surprise attack that was facilitated by the perfidy of the United States government, pretending to engage in negotiations while preparing for war. Maybe that's what we're seeing again, pretending to engage in negotiations while preparing for war. The difference this time is that the United States is in somewhat of a bind, because despite all of the military power that we have assembled near Iran, we're hearing from American officials that it may not be enough, that it may not be sufficient to achieve the results that the Trump administration has laid out for a campaign: regime change, suppression of Iran's ballistic missile launch capability. We may not have enough ammunition, which is, it's not a question of will, it's a question of capacity. And I believe right now the Pentagon is going over its war plans, recalculating, modifying to see if we can, in fact, accomplish the mission set out with the ammunition available. And if the answer is yes, I think we're going to war, because that's what this administration wants. This administration wants a war. But if the answer is no, then we need a face-saving way out of this predicament. And I believe that the Iranian position that is being presented will provide this face-saving mechanism. If Donald Trump is able to articulate that he has made a better deal than Barack Obama's JCPOA, that he, by staring down the Iranians and forcing them to consider their doom, made them come to the table and make this deal, then he'll walk away. And, I don't think the Iranians care if the president wants to lie and posture. I think the Iranian government actually cares about its people and doesn't want a war and is willing to, make the concessions necessary without compromising, core values, make the concessions necessary to avoid a war. And if the president wants to claim diplomatic victory, then let him. But I think this is what's happening right now, is that the United States is desperate to go to war. But the fact is we may not have the military capacity to achieve the stated objectives. And therefore, we're leaving the door open for the possibility of a diplomatic solution. And Iran is doing what it can to make sure that if that door is open, they have a diplomatic solution that is acceptable to the United States.
And you mentioned that this administration is desperate for this war. Why do you think that is, and why now?
There's a lot of politics here, but one, we're dealing with Israel, and we're dealing with Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu is an aging man, an unhealthy man, who is staring his mortality in the face. And he is desperate to ensure that the legacy of Benjamin Netanyahu is one linked to what he believes is the security of Israel. He has spent a lifetime posturing Iran as the greatest threat to Israel. He has been saying that Iran is just a few months away from a nuclear weapon for over 20 years now, maybe even longer. And he has said that to solve Israel's problems, the biggest obstacle to Israel achieving its the Zionistic dream of a greater Israel, which we now know, according to Mike Huckabee, might include the territory of a number of neighboring Arab nations, that Iran is the obstacle in front of them, that Iran needs to be destroyed. The Islamic Republic needs to be removed. This is Benjamin Netanyahu's legacy. He has been successful in convincing Donald Trump that this is indeed a worthy goal. But, there are political realities attached to achieving regime change. And you need basically all of your geopolitical and military and economic stars to align. Right now, we have a situation where it appears that the stars have aligned, that we have political will, we have the ability to fabricate justification, and we have, rarely do we have sufficient military power assembled to accomplish the task. And so I think, we have this window of opportunity that if isn't acted upon, it will dissipate. We are coming close to midterm elections. Donald Trump can't have a war on the eve of midterm elections. He needs to have this war happen now so he can spin it appropriately to achieve the desired political effect. Also, the accumulation of military resources is not something that can be sustained indefinitely. We have dismantled air defense systems in the Pacific and in Europe to reinforce in the Middle East. We can't sustain this. These assets must be returned at some point in time. We have forward deployed significant air power at a time when, we are claiming that the Pacific is our number one, theater of concern. We no longer have the air power, in the Pacific that could, realistically confront China should it make a move on Taiwan. So we need to resolve the Iranian crisis now. And if we don't, all of these stars stop being in alignment and this opportunity won't come again. And Benjamin Netanyahu may not be alive by the time the next alignment of the stars takes place.
Well, that's very interesting that Netanyahu wants to have this legacy, and basically Trump is fulfilling all of these hopes and dreams of one rogue actor, which is Benjamin Netanyahu. But there's also oil and gas at play here. I mean, this war, of course, is rooted in the fact that the 1979 Islamic Revolution overthrew the Shah, and the revolution basically cut off U.S. and British and all Western access to Iran's oil and gas, and they nationalized it. Can you talk a little bit more about how oil and gas is playing with this narrative to push for war?
Well, the United States has made a career. American officials have made literally a career out of keeping Iranian oil off the market. Iran is a member of the OPEC nations, OPEC plus, but it has not been able to get its oil on the market in the scope and scale necessary or desired because of sanctions, because of U.S. sanctions, European sanctions, etc. What Iran has done is found alternative markets, and right now I believe Iran is a significant supplier of oil to China. The United States is in an economic conflict with China right now as we speak. Venezuela was the Venezuela operation was an important aspect of this because China was acquiring oil from Venezuela. China had invested, $9 billion in a refinery capability designed specifically to handle Venezuelan crude. And now what we see is that the United States, rather than shutting off China from Venezuelan oil, is allowing China to buy this oil. But what's happened now is that Chinese energy supplies are controlled by the United States. And I believe that's the objective we want with Iran. We're not going to, if we achieve regime change, we will actually encourage Iran to sell more oil to China. But what we're trying to achieve is a situation where the Chinese economy becomes dependent upon a flow of energy that the United States has access to the on-off switch, so that in any existential economic crisis with China, we just hit the off switch and we put the Chinese economy into a crisis. And I think this is what's at play here. Plus, Iran has for some time now tied its survival to regional energy. Iran has said, if you attack our energy infrastructure, if you deny us the ability to get our energy to the market, we have the capacity to bring harm to regional energy production. And that is, of course, bringing harm to the global economy. So the other thing is the United States wants to eliminate Iran's ability to hold the global economy hostage. It's not a good feeling to have the Iranians have their hands on the regional energy production on-off switch. And so energy plays a large part of what's driving. But I just want to point out that this is very shallow thinking, that global energy security is just that, global. And the Iranians are not irresponsible players. And should the United States choose to engage Iran responsibly, diplomatically, these threats to international energy security would not exist. If we allowed Iran to enter the market as an equal, we would see that Iran would have a vested interest in keeping the market stable over a lengthy period of time. The last thing Iran would be doing is seeking regional crises that result in instability. And so if this was truly about energy, the appropriate tact is diplomacy, not confronting Iran militarily.
Of course. I mean, it's quite obvious that stability is not the goal here. It's instability in chaos, which the U.S. and Israeli military machine thrive off of. I mean, that's what fuels the weapons industry and the military industrial complex. And as you said, Iran's response would not just affect the global energy market, but they've made some threats as well that if the United States enters into this war, that Iran will act accordingly and possibly targeting US bases around the world. And so Iran is obviously not an Iraq, it's not even a Venezuela. Iran, despite it being sanctioned, it has quite a large and strong military capability. And we saw that when it was responding to Israel's attacks on it, when it destroyed many parts of Tel Aviv and hitting Israeli intelligence bases and military bases. Can you talk a little bit more about how Iran would respond and its military capabilities?
Well, I mean, first of all, Iran is an advanced military power. We have to respect that. Iran proved this during the 12-day war with the quality of its ballistic missile forces. The Iranians have been preparing for a conflict of existential proportions for decades. Remember, I think it was in the mid-2000s, 2005, 2006, when then Vice President Dick Cheney was threatening to go to war against Iran. The Iranians took this threat seriously, and they've been preparing ever since then for an existential conflict between Iran, the United States, and Israel. And so Iran has been studying the American way of war. Iran has been studying the Israeli way of war. And Iran has been organizing itself and developing weapons that are designed to counter the American way of waging war. The Iranians are also fully aware of the importance of energy security and the fact that Iran can threaten global energy security in and of itself is a deterrent value. One of the reasons why the United States is hesitant to act on Iran is that if we get this wrong, the off switch is hit on regional energy production, and the global economy, including the American economy, will go into a free fall. And so the Iranians have a lot of positives that are attached to their military. They're very professional, very technologically advanced, and their military is geared to defending themselves from known threats. Mitigating against this is that the United States military is likewise a very professional military with unmatched resources. There's no military or group of militaries in combination that match the resources that are poured into American defense. Just this year, the defense budget is expanding by more than a third to $1.5 trillion. I mean, that's just a mind-boggling amount of money. And just so people understand why I'm making this point, because oftentimes people misconstrue this. When I start talking about the U.S. military, they say, "Well, you're a warmonger. You're promoting war. You're just one of these USA chest thumpers." I think you know that I'm not, but I am a military professional, and so I have to deal with these issues from a professional standpoint. Before the 12-day war, I had, based upon my assessment of publicly available information, deemed that the Firdos underground enrichment facility was immune to conventional military attack, and that the only way we could take out this facility is if we used a low-yield nuclear bomb. I believe that was a sound assessment. But what I didn't know is that in the United States, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency had dedicated an entire office to examine the Firdos underground nuclear reactor and find a weakness that could be exploited. They spent years doing this. I want to say that again. They spent years doing this, and they found it through the ventilation shaft. And then we designed weapons to penetrate the ventilation shaft, and then we trained our pilots to fly the mission. And they rehearsed this mission over and over and over again. And when the time came to execute the mission, they did so flawlessly. They flew over Iran. Yes, we can talk about how this was sort of a doctored event. Maybe there wasn't the resistance that could have been there, but they flew over Iran and they delivered the munitions on target in a manner which achieved the desired result. So for the people out there that call the United States an empire in decline, that may be true. But an empire in decline, it begins its decline at the highest point of its strength. So when we talk about American empire in decline, we're not talking about America already in a total state of collapse. We're talking about America beginning the retrograde away from its highest point of power and relevance. We're still the most powerful nation on the earth, and we have the ability to put resources into problems that no other nation can. I'll give you another example. President Trump, when he's speaking about Venezuela, about the Maduro operation, said, Venezuela had the most modern Chinese radars, the most modern Russian radars, and they didn't work. Someday I'll tell you how we did that. So the implication is that the United States had a technical solution to these advanced radars. And as somebody who used to be part of the intelligence system that was designed to achieve these results, I'm here to tell you we're very good at what we do. We are very professional. And so I think people make a mistake when they talk about the strength of Iran. Iran is a nation of 90 million, but it's also a nation that's been under economic sanctions for decades now. It's not operating at its most efficient. It's a nation that only recently solidified their military relationship with Russia. Remember, during the 12-day war, Russia and Iran had signed a strategic security framework agreement, but Iran had not ratified it. And so there was nothing Russia could do to help Iran. And only 7 months have passed since that time. You're not going to radically transform Iranian military capability in 7 months. The same thing with China. It's only recently that China and Iran have entered into a more advanced phase of military cooperation. The United States has been preparing for this war for decades. We have rehearsed every aspect of this war. And my concern is that if the United States is prepared as it should be, the Iranian military won't stand a chance, because we will hit them with overwhelming force immediately and sustain this in a manner that keeps them off balance. I could be wrong, and I'm not encouraging this, but my fear is that the U.S. military are professionals. If we can't accomplish a mission, we tell our civilian leadership we can't accomplish that mission. We're not suicidal. We don't say, it's okay, boss, we'll give it the old college try. We don't do the college try. We do guaranteed victory. We do guaranteed outcomes. And so if the military is telling the president they can accomplish the mission of regime change and missile suppression, that means they are confident that they have the military capacity to do this. And understand, the only thing that is preventing the president from going forward isn't a lack of capability. No one's saying in the Trump administration, we can't achieve regime change. We can't do decapitation. We can't suppress missiles. They're saying we don't have enough ammunition to do this. The problem is logistics. The problem isn't capability. So, there are people who are confident they can win, which is bad news, because I would prefer that the American military told the president, we can't do this, because that's what they told him in January when he was getting ready to bomb. The military said, we're not going to win. We can't win. That's a different statement than what they're saying now. What they're saying now is we don't have enough ammunition. But if we did, we could win. And politically, that creates different dynamics when it comes to decision making.
Right, and that's certainly a realist military perspective that I think more people don't necessarily often hear, because there's so much like fog of war, and people are taking sides like, this side's going to win or that side's going to win. But you presented a very realist military perspective, which I can appreciate, because sometimes we need to be hit with reality. What are the capabilities of the U.S. military? What are the capabilities of the Iranian military and its grassroots resistance that it has within its own country? If the U.S. were to go to war with Iran, and I did ask this, I don't think you answered it unless I missed it. But how would Iran respond in terms of targeting U.S. bases And how would this spill over internationally?
Well, I believe the Iranian plan would be to unleash its ballistic missile force in a manner which turned Tel Aviv upside down. I think there would be no mercy.
So they'd go to Israel first.
First and foremost, they blame Israel for this, and Israel would be punished. But Iran has sufficient missiles to hit Israel and hit American military installations, which they have promised to do as well. Iran would also retain the capability to strike regional oil production facilities. Iran has the ability, has the capacity to achieve all of these objectives. The problem isn't capacity or will, it's will they be given the opportunity? Because the military force at the United States is assembled. Just to give you an example, we have brought in 3 squadrons of specially equipped F-16 fighters called Wild Weasels, and they work alongside specially equipped electronic warfare aircraft, and these are designed to take out enemy air defenses. Not standoff, we use cruise missiles for that. This is about taking out enemy air defenses so that we control the airspace over a region. And when I look at the way we have structured our force, remember I was a participant in the Gulf War in 1991, and I'm very familiar with the counter-Scud campaign, what it takes to use air power and special operation forces on the ground to target enemy ballistic missile launch capabilities. When I look at what we're getting ready to do in Iran, it clearly points to that we're trying to prevent Iran from launching these missiles. So while Iran may want to launch against Israel, we're going to do our best to ensure they can't launch against Israel. Iran might want to launch missiles against the USS Abraham Lincoln. We're here to ensure they can't launch those missiles because we're here to control the airspace and destroy anything and everything that moves on the ground underneath. So it's a race against capabilities. Does Iran have the ability to launch these missiles under attack? We don't know. We don't know. Iran has, underground missile cities. Do we have the ability to interdict these cities, or can those missiles be launched? We're getting ready to engage in something that's only been thought out in theory. Both sides training against, hypothetical possibilities. We're now, if we go to war, reality is going to meet reality, and we'll find out what is going to happen. It's a fascinating. Again, I apologize for the use of the word because I don't want people to think that I find this entertaining or desirable. I hate war, and I don't want this war to occur. But as a military professional, I look at this problem, and I try and war game it out in my mind. As we begin this attack, and Iran starts to respond, do we have the ability to suppress? And if we don't, and Iran starts firing missiles, for instance, if we're launching out of Jordan, which we appear to will be doing, what if Iran is able to destroy 20% of the airbase capability? Now we've lost that 20%, which means we're suppressing 20% less of Iran's capabilities. And if they start to fire more and suppress us more, we see a shift in the correlation of power. That is a possibility. What happens if we start destroying Iranian capability, in a manner that they can't recover, and our capacity increases? So, this is a big gamble. One thing I learned in the military is that no plan survives initial contact with the enemy. No matter how much I think I'm going to do, the moment the war starts, throw the plan away because you're simply reacting to reality, not theory. And the other thing that we learned is that the enemy always has a vote. You think you're going to try and do X, Y, and Z, but the enemy has a vote. They're going to counter you. They're going to be doing things that you're going to have to react to. So, this is going to be a very deadly dance between two very capable militaries. And there's no way of guaranteeing an outcome. But let me factor in one thing to put over this too. We're not going to defeat Iran through this air war. if Iran's to be defeated, we're going to have to suppress the will of the people to resist. This is the heart and soul of this conflict, and it's one that's not going to be waged by the U.S. military, but rather the intelligence services of Israel and the United States. If you remember, it was the United States that triggered the economic crisis in Iran on December 28th. Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury, brags about this at the World Economic Forum. We collapsed the rial, did a dollar crisis, and suddenly, people who make a living off of, commercial activity saw their prices go up, and so they went on strike, and these strikes then turned into more broad, manifestations of unrest because people were unhappy about the economy, but it wasn't violent. I think it was December 30th, 2 days into these peaceful protests, ones that were supported, in fact, by the Iranian president, who said, I am with the people on this. We need to do a better job with the economy. The Mossad, Israeli intelligence service, in their Farsi language social media, started broadcasting to the Iranian protesters, we are with you in spirit and on the ground next to you. We are on the ground with you. And that was the beginning of the emergence of other internet-based resistance movements that were now broadcasting into Iran, encouraging more violence, more protests, and direct violence against the Iranian government and the Iranian people. What we found is that the National Endowment for Democracy, which is sort of the modern day version of CIA operations that were run in the 80s, they state in their founding documents that they're just basically takeovering the mission from the CIA because it was bad PR to have the CIA doing regime change when we can just call it the NED. But they're bragging about how they're sending in things in. For what purpose? You create this network of internet connectivity. It dates back, and you may be familiar with the name I'm about to say, Jared Cohen. He wrote a book back in the early 2000s, basically talking about how it was his assessment that the Muslim youth were just like the American youth. And all we had to do is connect with them through the internet, and we could mobilize them in support of digital democracy, that we could make the Muslim world look just like us because their kids wanted to be just like us. And he was brought into the Bush State Department, then went on to work for Hillary Clinton. And digital democracy was his thing. But basically the idea was to inject capacity, internet capacity into a nation, and then use that internet to collapse the regime from within, to get the people that were exposed to turn away from the regime. It worked in Syria. I mean, in Syria, you had this internet connectivity, and you had these local community groups whose whole job was to stir up trouble and then film the Syrian government reacting to the trouble they stirred up, and then broadcast those images out to create the impression that the Syrian government was brutally repressing the Syrian people. And that's what happened in Iran. You have the Mossad, you have the CIA, you have other intelligence services encouraging violence, and then they have specially trained people who are there to capture snippets of the violence, package it, and broadcast it out to create the impression of the Iranian regime brutally suppressing the will of the people. And then they attach lies to it. They have videotapes showing violence, and they then say 10,000 people were killed, 20,000 people were killed, 30. And then they have their echo chambers on the outside already positioned to receive this information and then further broadcast it to weaponize it politically so that people like Donald Trump, Lindsey Graham, and others start talking about the cruel brutality of the Iranian regime against the poor Iranian people. And it ends up with the president saying help is on the way. It's all a lie. It's all manufactured. But it's there. And this is part of the CIA's master plan to collapse Iran from within. And when you look at the number of Starlink terminals that are potentially operating in Iran, up to 70,000, That's a significant penetration of Iranian society. And I will also point out again the Venezuelan model. Before we talked about radars being turned on and off. You know what else was turned off? Venezuela. Everybody believed that if the United States made a move against Maduro, that the Venezuelan people would rise up and support the revolution. And nothing happened because the CIA had penetrated Venezuelan society at every level, including the military, including the political, and they owned everybody. And everybody became passive. This is why the United States, in effect, controls Venezuela today. I believe that the United States and Israel have spent the last decades attempting to do the same thing in Iran. I believe that the Iranian government's willingness or desire to hope for a better outcome with the West has created a window of vulnerability that was exploited by the intelligence services of people who used economic distress to create opportunities to recruit people. And that we have achieved a significant level of recruitment inside Iran so that when the time comes for popular resistance, we're going to hit an off switch and it's not going to be as big as they want. At least this is what I believe is being briefed to the President of the United States, that the concept of the Iranian people rallying around the regime at a time of crisis, that won't happen because we'll have been able to turn it off by having recruited and compromised so many of them. And when you take a look at Israel's strike in June, the Iranians admit that the Israelis had penetrated deeply into the Revolutionary Guard command. And I will make one last observation that people never reflect on. Rafsanjani, I believe was his name, former president of Iran, especially right after the Iran-Iraq war, and he oversaw the reconstruction of Iran. And one of the ways that he retained the loyalty of the Revolutionary Guard command, et cetera, was to turn them into businessmen. And you see many of the businesses that are in Iran are run by the Revolutionary Guard. Business is an inherently corrupting process because it deals with money. And when you have people now who want to make money, and you have people saying we can help you make money only if the following circumstances are achieved, you have a window of vulnerability that goes deep into the Revolutionary Guard command. And I think that the CIA has spent the last couple of decades exploiting this window of opportunity. And so I'm very concerned that one of the reasons why the United States is behaving so confidently is that the CIA believes that it's holding a lot of cards, and that when the time comes, it will be able to weaken the regime from within, collapse it from within, and prevent the mobilization of the resources necessary to quell the unrest that we will be unleashing.
And I want to ask about just regional actors, because I want to end with Israel and its possession of nuclear weapons and its Samson option. But before we get to that, one last question about the prospect of war and what that would look like. Are the regional actors, like the state of Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, Israel, and other US and Israeli allies, the same countries that normalized relations with the state of Israel, we saw them push back against Iranian missiles using their defense systems to bring down the missiles as they were on their way to the state of Israel. How will these Arab regimes react if a war were to take place between the United States, Israel, and Iran? And would they assist the US again?
I don't have any trust and confidence in any Gulf Arab states doing the right thing, that is, being sovereign. You hear a lot of talk. We're not going to allow our base to be used. We're not going to allow our airspace to use. That's all a lie. They are 100% behind the concept of regime changing Iran if Donald Trump can guarantee that outcome. And what Donald Trump has said is basically, if we initiate this, it will end in regime change. So I think what you're going to see is that if there is a war, all of these nations will either rally behind the United States or remain passive. There will be no active measures taken to restrict the United States. Airspace will be made available, basing facilities will be made available, because they will have been briefed that this is it, the final fight, the end of it. There will be no Iranian regime. And this will be a moment of great celebration amongst these Gulf Arab states who have been positioning themselves as the enemy of the Islamic Republic for so long. It's only when Iran was able to stand up and assert itself that these people backed down and said, well, we have to figure out how to be friends. But they don't really want to be friends with the Islamic Republic because we're dealing with a political and economic elite that have sold out their own people a long time ago, sold out their own values. These are people who believe in money, and money corrupts everything. And Israel has been positioned as the heartbeat of a new regional economy through the Abrams Accords, only if they can get rid of the one obstacle that empowers all the other obstacles, Iran. And so I believe that if this conflict takes place, the Gulf Arab states will either be active participants in this conflict or they will passively observe, but they won't be trying to stop it unless it starts going bad soon. I mean, if it starts going bad soon, their job will be to stop this conflict before it spills over into their energy production capabilities, because that's the kiss of death to these economies. They aren't, multidimensional economies. They're single faceted, built around energy production, and a major regional war could bring these at risk, and that would be the collapse of these regimes. So I apologize if I insulted anybody, but I don't have any confidence in any of the Gulf Arab states to do the right thing when it comes to creating the conditions to avoid a conflict. They may be saying what they need to be saying right now to keep the Iranians off guard into believing that there isn't widespread support. But behind the scenes, I can guarantee you, in 30 years, when the cables are published, you'll be seeing that the United States has cut a deal with every single one of these nations on what they would do in time of conflict with Iran. These nations have sold out to Greater Israel years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. I don't think that they're going to be really standing up to the United States or Israel against this war. There will probably be active participants in some way. So I just have two questions left for you. One aspect of this story that is rarely talked about is the fact that Israel does have possession of dozens, if not hundreds, of nuclear weapons. In fact, we at Mint Press many years ago reported on the leaked Colin Powell emails where he stated that Israel has over 200 nuclear weapons, and many of them are pointed at Iran. Israel is not a signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the media doesn't even acknowledge that Israel has these nuclear weapons. But in the last month, in January, Israel has actually been suspected to have tested its own nuclear weapons at its WMD headquarters in Dimona, and it actually caused a 4.2 magnitude earthquake. So Israeli missiles have a great range, enough to hit anywhere in the US and Europe, to even as far as Japan, and has the capability of destroying the entire planet. Can you tell us more about Israel's nuclear weapons capabilities?
Well, first of all, Israel does have a nuclear weapons capability. This is a statement of fact. It's one that they developed without the permission of the United States. John F. Kennedy, when he was president, was seeking to confront Israel over this and get American inspectors on the ground, something Israel resisted. Lyndon Johnson was otherwise distracted, but again, not a fan of Israel's nuclear program. Richard Nixon, though, had to deal with the fact that after the Six-Day War, the American Jewish community became very more politically powerful, became more relevant as American Jews woke up to the romanticism of Israel. Prior to that, many American Jews were not supportive of the state of Israel. It was a socialist state, there was some hesitancy, but after the Six-Day War, especially when the Wailing Wall came under control of Israeli forces, there was a reawakening of this romanticism about Israel, and it became a political problem for American politicians. And so Richard Nixon had to deal with this. He and Golda Meir cut a deal. They sat down and they had very lengthy conversations. And we couldn't get Israel to give up its nuclear weapons. And we had a legal problem because of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. We couldn't allow Israel to have nuclear weapons. Legally, we would have to step in and take actions. So we had to create this concept of plausible deniability, where Israel would not admit to have nuclear weapons, and therefore we would not accuse them of having nuclear weapons. But this was a giant song and dance because we had to extract assurances from Israel that they would not use these nuclear weapons unless absolutely necessary. And then we went through the various measures that would have to be taken before Israel would, because once Israel says we have nuclear weapons, the United States must take action because of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So we needed to, if we were going to make the Israeli nuclear deterrence viable, we had to give Israel the ability to flex its nuclear muscles without declaring they had nuclear weapons. That the final act of declaration would be right before a demonstration and right before being used. And so we had these procedures, and they have been implemented. I was personally tracking one such thing during the Gulf War when Israel was being attacked by Iraqi Scud missiles. The Israelis were saying to the United States, you must stop these missiles. And of course, we couldn't. We tried. I tried. I was part of that group. We failed. But the Israelis were very concerned that the Iraqis had chemical and biological weapons ready to be fired against Israel. And they were right. What we found out later as weapons inspectors is that the Iraqis had actually positioned 7 missiles with chemical warheads loaded on them, ready to be used if Israel or somebody struck Saddam Hussein and killed him. They were going to automatically fire these. And there were other missiles with biological warheads ready to be fired as well. And so the Israelis wanted to send a signal to Israel, to the Iraqis, not to use these weapons, or else something would happen. And this is part of the protocol that the United States had developed. And so what Israel did is pulled a Jericho 3 missile out, and they brought it up and they fired it. And they fired it the exact distance from Israel to Baghdad, but instead it flew into the Mediterranean. So it was a demonstration of capability, designed to tell the Iraqis, we will hit you with the Jericho missile if you do and that Jericho missile will have a nuclear warhead without saying it. So we know that the Israelis have flexed their nuclear muscle in accordance with this plan. But the idea that Israel is just going to up and start launching nuclear weapons here, there, and everywhere, that's not the agreement, and that's not what they would do. Even the Samson option, which is a name that's used out there, Seymour Hersh, a good friend of mine, wrote the book, The Samson Option.
Yeah.
If you read the book, you'll see that there is no Samson option. It's a theoretical. It's a name given to a hypothetical. But the Israelis don't have a plan that says this is the Samson option. It's an assessment of people about what Israel would use its nuclear weapons for, to bring everything down in case Israel fell. But it's not actually the way that the structured nuclear employment plan that exists with the United States as originally negotiated with Richard Nixon would play out. Actually, Israel would be required before it could use a nuclear weapon to hint that it had it and then actually demonstrate it, either through an underground detonation, which maybe this is what this was, and then actually deploying. So what we may have seen at Dimona, I have to take a look at the size, the seismic data, see how far below. A lot of time people go, 4.5, and I say, well, how deep was it? 10 kilometers. Wasn't a nuclear weapons test. nuclear weapons tests around.
No, that's not deep enough. Yeah.
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 No. Nuclear weapons test is shallow, a kilometer and a half. You don't
Okay,
go
I
that deeply.
misunderstood. Okay.
Yeah. Nuclear weapons test is much shallower. So if you have a seismic event that's near the surface, a kilometer underneath, you might have a nuclear weapons test. But if you have a seismic event that's 10 kilometers down, you don't have a nuclear weapons test. And a lot of people miss out on that reality. So I'd have to look at it to see if this was in fact a test or just part of what is normal regional seismic activity. But we come down to the real fact, though, is that Israel is not a signatory to the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty and acts as a rogue nation. And the hypocrisy of Israel, who has built this nuclear weapons capability and uses it, as leverage, insisting on regime change in Iran, a nation that doesn't want a nuclear weapon, has not been shown to be possessing one or trying to possess one. It just shows the hypocrisy of the situation. The fact that the Gulf Arab states continue to buy into this hypocrisy, this lunacy, is just further condemnation of who they are politically and collectively.
Yeah, it's very scary to see what will develop from this prospect of war. I mean, I'm Palestinian American. I have family in Palestine, and they call me every single day to tell me that they're preparing also for the war. And so the prospect of Iran hitting sites in Israel is really scary for them. And obviously this could spill over in other regions of the world. And I guess we just have to wait to see. But what I do know, and what's quite obvious to the world right now, is that the United States created a Frankenstein, which is Israel, committing genocide, mass human rights abuses, and pulling the US in these horrific wars. I mean, one could argue even that the Iraq war was being pushed by the state of Israel. And all of these wars, all of these wars, it was, of course. Did you want to add anything else before we wrap it up? No question. Oh yeah, go ahead.
The Bible speaks of wars and rumors of wars, and not in a positive fashion. I don't want to be too naive. I'd like to say we need to learn how to be more human to one another. We need to behave more properly. But instead, I'm going to finish with a harsh geopolitical observation. If there is a war with Iran, it will set off, even if we remove the regime from power, the consequences to the United States in the long term will be devastating. This will not end the way we want it to end. We will unleash regional destruction, regional unrest that will have political manifestations here at home. Right now, the Zionist enterprise, Greater Israel, Christian Zionism, AIPAC, in the United States is under attack. When you take a look at the Israeli reaction to the Tucker Carlson interview with Mike Huckabee, they realistically say that we're in trouble, we being Israel, that in the Republican Party, there's an increasing divide between people who support Israel, the Christian Zionists, and people who resent America putting Israel first. And this Iran conflict could actually empower an anti-Israeli element within the American body politic that could lead to the weakening of the control of Israel over the United States, and could be the beginning of the end of this Zionist Frankenstein that you speak of. Because without full American support, Israel can't exist. And so that's the silver lining behind the cloud. I don't want a war. This war would be horrible. But the forces of history are moving in a direction that isn't good for Benjamin Netanyahu or for this Zionist state called Israel. And, I would prefer to see Israel collapse from its own inequities, its internal inconsistencies, its human hypocrisy. But if they choose to go to war, understand that this war will accelerate the collapse of Israel, even if it results in the demise of the Islamic Republic.
It just seems like Israel keeps shooting itself in the foot. I mean, look at what happened with the genocide in Gaza. It really turned the whole world against Israel and even divided the conservative movement here, the pro-Zionist, Christian Zionist movement in the United States. And it's only getting worse for that movement. They're getting divided more and more. And Israel just continues to shoot itself in the foot. It's almost like it just wants to bring down the US with it. You know, if we're going down, you got to come down with us.
They may succeed, you know. We'll see.
We will see. Well, Scott, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to have you on, and I always learn so much from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.